And many thanks indeed for staying with us. Let's turn our attention now to the war in the Middle East. We're learning that the Israeli military has ordered people near the Al-Shifa medical complex in Gaza City to evacuate. This comes as the Israeli military announced it's conducting what they call a precise operation in the hospital. The IDF claims Hamas is using the medical facility to conduct and promote terrorist activities. A spokesperson, Daniel Hagari, said in a social media post, which partly reads, "We know that senior Hamas terrorists have regrouped inside the Al-Shifa hospital and are using it to command attacks against Israel." He asked that the military would be conducting a humanitarian efforts during the planned assault, providing food and water to patients and medical staff. According to Gaza's health ministry, the raid, which began at 2 a.m. local time, has resulted in a number of deaths and injuries, adding that anyone who tries to move is targeted by super bullet. It also notes that some 30,000 people, including displaced civilians, wounded patients and medical staff, are trapped inside the hospital amid Israel's onslaught. There are also indications that there were Israeli vehicles inside the hospital's county yard and that Israeli forces launched missiles and opened fire at the hospital's specialized surgery building. In the meantime, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says his forces would act in the Rafah city of Gaza, where international opposition to a ground offensive is in the area. Speaking at a government meeting in Jerusalem, Mr. Netanyahu said, open quote, "Those who say that the operation in Rafah will not happen are the same ones who said that we would not enter Gaza," end quote. He says Israel will act in Rafah, adding that it will take a few weeks and it will happen. He also dismissed outside pressure from allies, saying no international pressure would deter Israel from realizing all the goals of the war. Israel's allies, including the U.S., have warned the country not to send in troops to Rafah, with concerns about Hamas casualties among the 1.4 million displaced people sheltering there. The Palestinian Foreign Ministry called the Prime Minister's remarks a blatant challenge to the international and American consensus on protecting civilians. Meanwhile, the United Nations Population Fund is describing the situation in Gaza as a nightmare. Its representative for the state of Palestine, Dominic Allen, says the humanitarian crisis is beyond catastrophic. He asks that there are a lot of narrative and disinformation about the war.
What we see in Gaza is that it's a nightmare which is much more than a humanitarian crisis. It is a crisis of humanity. And the situation is beyond catastrophic. And whilst we see the violence of the war on the ground, there is also a war for the narrative and for disinformation. And having left Gaza this week, I can assure you that it's worse than I can describe, or that the pictures can show, or that you can imagine. What I saw as I drove through Gaza really broke my heart. Because Gaza is dust. And my greatest fear is what may come for Rafah. And whilst driving up through Gaza, into Gaza City, I think what I took away from that was the looks in the eyes of the people, which the emotion is truly indescribable. Everyone we passed, everyone we spoke to was gaunt, frail, emaciated, hungry. Everybody was doing this for food. What they're also seeing in terms of maternal care is a high increase, nearly double the amount of complicated cases of births coming in. That means there needs to have more healthcare. And they're seeing this coming from malnutrition, from hunger, from dehydration, and from the stress caused by great fear, which continues to be prevalent everywhere. Fear is just everywhere in Gaza, but especially for these pregnant women, because the doctors are reporting that they no longer see normal-sized baby. They've not seen a normal-sized baby. They don't see them. What they do see, though, tragically, is more stillborn births, more stillborn babies, and more neonatal deaths.
All right, let's cross over live to Jerusalem, where the VOA's Linda Grindstein is live for us. Linda, great to see you again. Well, this is the fourth raid on Al-Shifa hospital since the October 7th attack. What else are you hearing? What else can you tell us?
Well, unlike previous times, this time Israel was careful to show what it claims, that Hamas gunmen fired at the soldiers. They said the soldiers came to the hospital to arrest people and were attacked with gunfire and fired back. Israel is now saying that 20 Hamas gunmen were killed and about 80 were arrested. They say that including among those was one senior Hamas official. The Palestinians say that Hamas official was involved in coordinating humanitarian aid and that Israel deliberately assassinated him. Israel also showed some of the guns and money that it found inside the hospital in an effort to sort of prove that it's not just kind of going in. It also coordinated the attack with the doctors in the hospital and told them that the patients would not have to leave. The people who were asked to evacuate were some 30,000 civilians who have gone back to the north of Gaza. The question, though, is why was Hamas able to take over Shifa Hospital again, which is supposedly in an area that Israel is in control of?
I mean, some critics are concerned about what exactly is Israel's justification for this raid. I mean, because for many, the patients, civilians, mothers, children are the ones who are left to bear the brunt. Linda?
Well, what Israel says is that Hamas is embedding itself in the civilian population, and it says it has no argument with the civilian population, that it, is doing everything it can to avoid civilians being killed. But when Hamas is right in the middle of the civilian population, or in this case, when it seems that Hamas was using the Shifa hospital as a place to both organize and to attack Israeli troops. And as you see, the pictures we're looking at now just also show you how crowded everything is and how it's almost impossible, Israel says, to avoid hitting civilians.
And of course, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says his forces will press on with an offensive in Rafah. What's the general body language from residents in Israel? Does Mr. Netanyahu does he have the support of Israelis?
He does not have the support of Israelis. In fact, his popularity is lower than it's ever been, but the army does have the support of Israelis. And I think that most Israelis believe that this war is an existential war. They say that Hamas started the war on October 7th when it attacked Israeli civilians and raped women and children, and that Israel has to press on until it really achieves its goal of getting rid of Hamas as a military threat. That said, today, Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke by phone with President Biden. It's the first time they've actually spoken in over a month. We haven't heard any, results of that or what's come out of it, but it's certainly possible that President Biden warned Netanyahu against an operation in Rafah. Israel has said that it will not launch that operation until the civilians there, but there are about 1 million have been moved to safety. There are 1.5 million Palestinian, 1.5 million civilians in Rafah. In addition, a lot of the troops in Gaza, Israel has taken out its reserve forces. So I spoke to a couple of military experts today who said they don't believe that an Israeli attack on Rafah is imminent, and that if it's going to happen, it won't happen for several weeks.
And if the Prime Minister indeed crosses the red line, what will become of the relationship between Israel and the U.S.?
Well, it seems that President Biden would be willing for there to be a sort of pinpoint operation, or for Israel to, if Israel really does manage to move that many civilians to humanitarian corridors, although, again, it seems extremely difficult to move 1.5 million people, and the truth is there's not really anywhere for them to go. Most of those people have already been displaced once or twice since the fighting began. There are certainly tensions in the U.S.-Israeli relationship. At the same time, the U.S. remains Israel's, strongest ally. I find it hard to believe that Netanyahu would do something like an all-out invasion of Rafah, excuse me, if the United States is saying he shouldn't do that.
And just before we let you go, Linda, sorry about that. Bring us up to speed as regards regarding the humanitarian conditions right now in Gaza. It's becoming dire by the day. I understand there's reports by the United Nations that a famine is very possible in the coming days.
Especially in northern Gaza, where it's been much harder to get aid in and delivered to people there. In southern Gaza, the situation is not quite as bad. As we heard just before, the humanitarian situation really is in crisis. People do not have enough food, and at least a quarter of the population is facing severe malnutrition and really does not have enough to eat. Now, each side blames the other. Hamas says that Israel is not allowing aid in. Israel says it is allowing as much aid as can get in, and that Hamas, or that the UN is not able to distribute that aid, and that Hamas is stealing that aid and then selling it on the black market. And people really don't have money, so people don't have food. But whoever's responsible, the situation is growing increasingly dire, and it really is on the brink of a catastrophe.
All right, Linda, we'll keep our fingers crossed. The conversation between U.S. President Joe Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, we do not have the details just yet, but we'll see how we can indeed inform our viewers here in Nigeria and all around the world about the details of that conversation as soon as we get there. But we must thank you most kindly for speaking with us. VOA's Linda Grandstein, live for us in Jerusalem.
Thank you.